Welcome to the first wrap-up of the year for January, where I read so much and I loved so much. My average rating was like a 4.3 because I had to figure it out because I'm like, I am rating so many things 4.5 stars. Not too many 5 stars, but I had so much fun. I read way too many pages and listened to way too many hours of audiobooks, realistically. But like my reading habits kind of went during the week. I'd maybe read 50, 60 pages a day, and then on the weekend I would read like entire books. So apparently that's where my reading mood's been, but 4,200 pages-ish physically read and like 40 hours of audiobooks. Granted, I listen at 2 times speed, but I read 12 things, a short letter, and one of those 12 things I read twice. And today we're going to split things into genres because I read all over the genre space as well. And if you're new to my wrap-ups, I usually just break things up into themes, tropes, genres. It's what I think is fun. And today I attempted within the genres to go from lowest rated to highest rated. Granted, so many things on this list are like the same rating for very different reasons. So take all of the stars with a grain of salt and just listen to like what I say, if it makes sense. My brain's a little dead this week. Let's start with science fiction because it feels like it's been forever since I've talked about science fiction on this channel, since apparently fall and winter, my fantasy brain just goes like, finish all the series. And let's start with one that's been on many a TBR. That was Ursa Major. So this is the second book in the Resonance trilogy. First one was First Light, and it's an indie published trilogy. I think all of them are out on Kindle Unlimited. It's a trilogy. I listened to the audiobook. It really helped me shovel snow off the car this weekend, because if you didn't know, a lot of snow fell in Boston this past weekend. And yeah, it was really fun. I think this definitely will fall into middle book syndrome for the trilogy for me, because it was definitely kind of slow and very reflective, whereas the first book I remember being really action-packed and really intriguing and mysterious. And this one was more, we're in this situation, what do we do? And it was very planning based. But then the end of the book happened and I already immediately purchased the third book from this series, and I'm really excited to see where it ends. There's nothing super groundbreaking about it, but I just really like the characters and the character development, and I'm invested at this point. I need to know what's happening to these people. How are we getting out of this situation? Because the situation, although not groundbreaking, there's a lot of, rebellion. It feels very Star Wars like adjacent, but there's a lot of nuance being taken into account in the whole, well, we need to defeat this thing, but then what do we do next? And I like rebellion stories that have that conversation. Next up was one that wasn't on my TBR, but like was kind of on my TBR, and I read it in like 2 days, and that's The Last Conquista. This is a middle grade book, and it actually has just won recently the Newbery. I read it before it won that award, but congrats to this book. This book is amazing. So this is a story. Earth is no longer habitable, so there are certain spaceships that are going into space to go find a planet, and she is on one of them, and they have to go into a long, it's not a cryo sleep, but one of those long sleeps that you always see in the movies like Alien or Aliens and stuff like that. And when she wakes up, things are not how they are supposed to be. And there's a lot of themes of like the importance of our past and stories, and how there is strength in the diversity of our community. But also, it was just like a great page-turning time, and I was actually very stressed. Like, this is a middle grade story that, like, I did not know what was going to happen next. I was really stressed a lot of the time. There were some things I predicted, but, like, that wasn't a big deal. I listened to the audiobook for this, and I highly, highly recommend it. Thank you to my friends who told me to pick it up. It was a lovely time. This next one's very hyped that I finally read at the beginning of the month, and it's so long ago, but All Systems Red by Martha Wells, the first Murderbot book, and I loved it. I think it did exactly what it set out to do as a project. It felt like reading a TV show, like one-off special episode with this character that I was being introduced to, like a really solid pilot to a TV show that's like a character study. And I really loved the character of Murderbot. They are everyone. I mean, I think I said in my Friday reads when I talked about it, it's like the most relatable human, non-human character that I've ever had written down on page. So I liked it from a plot perspective. I really enjoyed the pacing of it. Like I said, it reminded me of a lot of sci-fi TV that I like to consume, and Murderbot was a great character, and I liked how the ending turned out. So I need to get back into that world, read another book in that series, but this has been one of those hyped sci-fi books that has been staring at me probably since it's been out, like at my bookstore, and so I'm finally happy to have finally read it. So this next one, I just posted my review, and that's Goliath by Tochi Onibuchi. Yes, that review is 24 minutes, and yes, somehow it's still completely spoiler-free. I do not talk about anything character or plot related. I just discuss all of the reasons I like and have struggled with reading that book. So for more detailed responses, go check out that video. I'm really proud of it. It's one of the better reviews I think I've put together. But I have read Goliath twice this month. The first time probably would have been more of like a 4-star, like a low 4-star rating, like in terms of like the overall encompassing experience. This time it was a solid 4.5 star, and like there's just like a slight thing that prevents it from being a 5-star, but honestly, if it stays in my mind long enough, like if I'm still talking about Goliath a year from now, it's a 5-star read. Like that would be enough to offset the thing that bothers me in the story. This is a dystopian near-future sci-fi that is very fragmented, kind of just told in these connected vignettes. It's very nonlinear in its narrative structure, and it's very dense and challenging. But I think it's one of those sci-fis that does a really good job of saying, what if X happened? And answering that question, but not trying to solve the what if X happens sort of question. It's more you're observing this moment in the future history. And it is, I think, very realistic that something like this could happen. And I really appreciated the different perspectives we got in this story. I thought it was really intentionally well crafted. Now, I don't think that way that it's crafted will work for everyone. And I go into that in detail in the review. But man, on reread, I really liked a lot of the choices that were made. And I'm still making connections. Just earlier today, someone commented on the review telling me a reference that I missed. I'm like, oh man, that's awesome. So I really liked Goliath. It was a strong new release to start the year off with. And then my favorite sci-fi of the month, although it's technically not 100% sci-fi, but it's more sci-fi than fantasy, so I'm putting it here, and that's The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Do I love this short story collection more than Exhalation? I don't know. I have no clue, but this was a solid short story collection for me, and I tried to make a review. I haven't deleted the footage, but I haven't looked at the footage because it didn't feel like it was going to be a coherent, useful review when I put it together. But essentially, when I read short story collections, I like it to be like a music album. You know, I like to have some thematic connection or some clear sign that this is the same author writing all of these stories. It doesn't have to be the same narrative structure, it doesn't have to be the same genre, but I like there to be a smooth flow from beginning to end, because like I like my music albums. And that's what happens here. There are lots of themes that are kind of grouped together, and there's sometimes different angles on the same question done and grouped close to each other. There is sci-fi, there is fantasy, there are different genres of sci-fi, there are really compelling themes of history and its importance and who tells history and what is your responsibility as an individual to reveal what you know and fight for what's right. Like there's a lot of cool stuff. It's got like basic deductive reasoning stories that aren't like super flashy with plot but are like fun to think about. It had some really emotionally impactful stories for me. I enjoyed so much of it, and there was one story where I was reading it, I'm like, this reminds me of a story from A Story of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. And Ken Liu says in the author note that it was inspired by the story I was thinking of. So that was really cool to see too. And I like both of them, and I actually think the execution of Ken Liu's version was more enjoyable for me and a really interesting thought experiment. So I love that collection. I loved Buddy reading it with Abby and Evie, and we're still getting thoughts from Stephanie because she kind of joined late. And it was just a very enjoyable time, and I now really want to read The Hidden Girls and The Grace of Kings because I had such a good time with all of the subgenres, and the historical fantasy stories had me really interested because I know Grace of Kings is more historical fantasy than anything else. Well, we'll now go into fantasy, and like the sci-fi, I'll kind of go from least to most favorite approximately. And so the first one is Malice by John Gwynne. I have a review for this. Generally, I was underwhelmed with my experience, but I did read it very quickly, and I do plan to continue with the series. I do have a review where I kind of alternate between pros and cons. That's how I formatted that one, where I go, this was something I like, and this is something I didn't like, and just kind of going back and forth so nothing got too grouped together in its negativity, if that makes sense. I think it's really fun and campy, and it has tropes that I like, but I just had a lot of issues connecting with characters, partially because of the writing style, but also partially because of character work decisions that were made by the author. But like I said, I'm going to read the next book. I was a bit bummed that I didn't love it as much as my friends do because I wanted to. Like, it's not like I enjoy, having a book that I didn't enjoy reading. Like, that was, 15 hours that I spent reading that book. Because this was one of those books that I read in like 2 days. So, but I have Valor on my Kindle, and if I end up having time or want to read it, I will, because it does have this cozy fantasy quality that I did enjoy while I read Malice, and it is very easy to read. Another campy book that I read, this was actually a reread, and that's House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I'm very ready for the sequel now. I'm so excited. Like, this was a book that, like, it was very campy. It was basically like every other Sarah J. Maas book I read, but maybe with a slightly better plot than normal. I say that, but it, like, also had parts of the plot that I'm like, okay, I don't really love this trope or stuff like that. But the ending is just so action-packed, and there's so many of like those big cinematic, fan service moments that I just had a great time with, and I forgot a lot. I think this was one of the first books I read at the start of the pandemic in 2020, so like having a reread before the sequel is very important for me, and I'm really excited to see where we're going next. Like, what is going to be the motivation behind the plot? Like, we are not in the same position that we were at the start of the book, and I just need to see where things go. So, enjoyable, really fun candy. I'm really glad I read it. That was another book where I read like 300 pages of it in like one sitting. And this next one, like Ursa Major, has been on a TBR for a very long time, and that's Midnight Tides by Steven Erikson, 5th Malazan book. I have to finish that spoiler vlog. I'm going to do that after I film this and hopefully have that up this coming weekend if I can get my life together. And I loved it. This is for sure my favorite Malazan book. It just, I don't know, it had a good tonal, like, back and forth between, like, almost Terry Pratchett-esque humor in dialogue scenes, and then very, like, thoughtful, philosophical, like, musings on empire and capitalism. Like, I'm glad it had both, because both were kind of extreme, but somehow together it worked out pretty well, and I really loved all the characters. I really loved all the reveals. I thought this had much better payoff for me than House of Chains, which is one that I didn't like as much, but also I was having fun before the payoff. I think this is the first Malazan book where I was having an enjoyable reading experience the entire time. Like, I read hundreds of pages of this book at a time, and that's the first time I've been able to do that with a Malazan book without being burnt out. So, also, very excited, and I have Bone Hunters in the audiobook on my Kindle staring at me, waiting for me to be in the mood to pick it up, because I read the synopsis. And it looks like it's a return to some old favorite characters, which intrigues me. So the last fantasy, though, that we'll talk about is Turning Darkness into Light and, like, The Companion Letter, because I read them basically the same night. Another book that I read very quickly, and that's why it's one of my 5-star reads of the month, is because I was completely immersed and escaping and having fun reading, and just, it wasn't a chore to read. I was just enjoying the mystery and the characters interacting and getting back into this world. I was incredibly cozy, I was incredibly entertained, and then with the letters, I just got to hear Lady Trent talk again, which was amazing. I have a review now for the entire Natural History of Dragons, Memoirs of Lady Trent series, and although Lady Trent's my favorite character in the series, this is my favorite book. I just had so much fun with the mixed media quality to it, and this had a really compelling mystery, in my opinion, about history and how do we correctly, write down history and the implications on the present, and there were just some themes or some optimistic outlooks at the end that I really appreciated. A lot of the other books that I read this month with heavier themes had more realistic, heavy outlooks, which is fair, but it was kind of nice to see an optimistic, uplifting outlook to that theme. So just an incredibly pleasurable experience and a great way to, like, temporarily close the door on the Lady Trent books for me for now until I reread them in a few years. Now we get out of the SFF area, so I read 2 historical fictions, which, who am I? The first one I'll talk about is The Vanishing Half. This is actually for my book club in February, so somehow I got ahead. I listened to the audiobook, and this is one that's very popular. I think it was in a book box or something. It's about 2 twin sisters who both could pass as white. One chooses to, and one chooses not to, in, I believe, the 60s to 80s time period in the United States. And Hearing that premise, I wasn't expecting the narrative structure that we got. It wasn't a bad narrative structure. I was interested in the point of views that I got that I wasn't expecting to get. I was expecting it to be primarily the two sisters, but you have other point of views and other characters represented, and you kind of travel the country. It was really interesting. I don't think this is a story that will stick with me for a long time, but I really enjoyed it. Like, it was a very good reading experience, and I am excited to see what people talk about or think about at book club. I think one thing that I don't think was portrayed to me in a way that, like, I don't know. I think I understand why one of the sisters does what she does, but I don't think she gave me an explanation that I believe. And I don't know if that makes sense. I still need to, like, figure out my thoughts on that. But, like, in terms of just enjoying the plot, I think for me this was more of a plot-driven historical fiction, which I'm not really used to. It didn't feel very character reflective, if that makes sense. And then the other one I read that I loved was The Mountains Sing. Oh man. So we discussed this earlier this month for book club, and the more I think about it, the more I really like how this is crafted. It's written in the author's second language, so it can be published globally, because I don't think it's actually even allowed to be published in Vietnam. I could be wrong about that, so don't quote me. But this is a story about Vietnam in the 20th century. Forget the earliest moment. I mean, there's a moment before the Great Famine, and then you have the Land Reform Act, and then you have the Vietnam War. So there's a lot of major moments in Vietnamese history that are highlighted here through the generational lens of this grandmother. So you have two point of views. You kind of go back and forth between, you have the grandmother, and then you have Guava, our main character. And she's kind of being told this story, and she's growing up and coming of age. So the tone of it is kind of very storyteller, almost middle grade-esque, even though it does not pull back the traumatizing, harsh war scenes or moments. So it's tonally, I think, actually worked really well for me in terms of not hiding me from the dark stuff, but also not hurting me too much, if that makes sense. Like, there were still moments where scenes happened and I was taken aback, but at the same time, it was palatable. And I learned a lot, and I was invested in this family and seeing them live through the generations. And I think this is a perspective on Vietnam that I don't think many of us get a chance to read, because it's primarily almost always only about the Vietnamese War, and then almost always from the Western perspective. So this was really great, and also it was revealing in really small ways, like about food and, like, I don't know, scenery and setting, like things that I just never connected dots with or thought about. So I really liked the structure of this. I liked the characters. I liked the story. So, there's something that prevents it from being a complete 5-star, but I really loved reading this story, and I really liked its purpose and how it is crafted. And then the last book I shall talk about, we are going to talk about in length on Saturday on Jess Owen's channel. I'll have that down below, assuming we'll have the link by this video goes up. But it's going to be on Jess's channel, I believe, at 1 or 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to talk about Mediocre. This is a book that I would recommend to someone who wants to be angry and want to be angry with someone in solidarity. There was a lot in this that I don't think brought new information to my attention, but I did enjoy listening to someone have her facts, lay them all out, and kind of be passionate about it. And I enjoyed that experience. It was kind of cathartic, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about it and, see what other people think. I had a good time. The premise of this is basically how our systems in America work as designed, how everything's actually working appropriately for how we have designed it. And here are reasons why, with different moments in history, different highlighting of primarily moments in history where white men shaped something. And typically the word mediocre is meant to evoke emotion, but it's usually like an average guy, does something that triggers this thing. And it's just like, but why? Why did this happen, if that makes sense? So I enjoyed listening to it. I don't think I took anything super new from it, and I don't think this is a book I would use as a tool to help someone see my side of things in a political sense. So that's my current, like, baby thoughts on Mediocre. I haven't fleshed them out yet for the live show. So those are all the things. I somehow talked about all of them in less than 30 minutes, so I'm pretty proud of myself. And yeah, like I said, super high rating, a lot of great books. I think if I had to pick a favorite, it's The Paper Menagerie. But I mean, like, obviously, I reread Goliath this month, so like, who knows? Let me know what was your best read. Are you having a strong start to the reading year? I know I am. And if you want to leave an emoji, I don't know, leave a spaceship. I had a lot of good sci-fi this month, and I'm pretty happy to be back into reading sci-fi since I had kind of like a mini 2-month hiatus. And like, if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.